everybody. Good morning, or actually good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the October 24, 2019 Delta Stewardship Council meeting. Let's establish a quorum, starting with Ken on my right.
Weinberg present.
Maranian present.
Beard here.
Tatayan here.
Villegas here.
And we have a quorum. So on to agenda item 3, closed executive session. We anticipate returning from closed session at about 12:50. Oh, it says agenda item 5. Okay, why don't we go ahead? Let's see, we have, this says agenda item number 5, Thomas Randall, Solano County Airport Land Use Commission. Is he present? Are you?
So if I can just explain what's happening, you're skipping to an agenda item 5, public comment as a courtesy to someone who's already here.
Mm-hmm.
Then we will go back to agenda item 3 for closed session, and then when agenda item 5 is reopened, there will be also opportunity for public comment on that item again.
Okay. Come on up, thank you.
All that you guys do?
On.
Am I here? I am here. And all the councilmen, thank you. I'm coming here to talk about the, if you all have a paper here, and paragraph number 4 kind of sums it up, which means that the development of habitat which might attract birds is significant concern within 5 miles of the Travis Air Force Base and the Rio Vista Municipal Airport. And our concern is that when this come about, that you consider the wildlife habitat, because I guess the rules are you have to, I mean, with the waterways, you want to build up the habitat also. That's part of the deal. And bird strikes are really important to us, and we wanted to bring it to your attention because we have pilots that fly as low as, from Rio Vista Airport, as low as 250 feet, and that could cause an airstrike. And just for a little statistics, at Sacramento, in 2018, they had 134 airstrikes. That's an annual about 129,959. And about 60, when the bird strikes occur, about 61% of the bird strikes with silver aircraft occur during landing phase of the flight, descent, approaching, and landing roles. 36% occur during takeoff, climb, and the remainder 3% occur during the en route phase. And the altitude, at what altitude do most bird strikes occur? It's about 35% of the bird strikes occur at the ground level during takeoff and landing roll, and 92% occur during, at or below 3,500 feet. So a lot of people, and that's our concern, the cost of injuries and life. And our statistics says from 1988 to 2017, there were 287 human fatalities attributed to wildlife strikes globally. From 1990 to 2017, there were 311 human injuries attributed to wildlife strikes with U.S. aircraft. And our men and women at Travis Air Force Base, they're trying to keep us safe. We want to keep their airspace safe. We want to be able to fly at our assault landing zone without striking birds. One of those engines are millions of dollars, I don't know exactly. But we do a lot of flying around in that area, which is air assault landing zone, which is what they practice is overseas per se. They're landing in combat zones, so they have to be really low. So the FAA says 500 feet above any item is as low as you can go. So they have to get low. And when they come down, they have to stop, unload, and get up and go. And if they come down low and we have habitat out there, knowing that birds, when you fly over birds, they come up. And those big airplanes, which we call birds too, it takes them a long time to turn. A long time to turn. So we just want you to consider this habitat part of this plan that you might not be aware of, but I just want to bring it to your attention. Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking the time and coming here today and bringing this to our awareness, and we will consider it. Thank you. So council has advised me to reestablish a quorum, so we'll do the roll call again, starting with Ken, am I right?
Weinberg, present.
Emerald here.
Moranian here.
Fiorini here.
Tatayan here?
Yegas here.
Okay. Now we will move on to agenda item 3, closed session, and expect to reconvene a few minutes before 1 o'clock. Thank you. Okay, we are reconvening from closed session. There was no action taken during closed session, so we will now move on to agenda item 5, consideration of consistency of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments 2020 Metropolitan Transportation Plan / Sustainable Communities Strategy and its consistency with the Delta Plan. Jessica, did you want to lead us off?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we're starting off with an action item here before we get into regular business in order to accommodate our guest schedule today. So a warm welcome to James Corliss, the Executive Director of SACOG, the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. Today we're focusing on an authority of the councils that really doesn't get frequent attention at our meetings, which is our authority over regional plans, and the legislature's intention in the Reform Act that these plans be developed consistent with the state's Delta Plan. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to our Assistant Planning Director, Harriet Ross. Harriet.
Good afternoon, Chair Tatayan and members of the council. I'm Harriet Ross, Assistant Planning Director here, and with me today presenting will be James Corliss. He's the Executive Director of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, SACOG, and also in support we have Clint Holtzen. He's the Planning Manager at SACOG. Okay, no problem. Okay, so as Jessica alluded, this agenda item is a little bit different today. The Delta Reform Act does give the council regional authority to review regional plans, but the regional plan itself is not coming to us as a covered action. So today I'm going to go ahead and review the specific authority that the Delta Reform Act defines, And then I'm going to turn it over to James, who will present the SACOG's plan and its relationship to the Delta. Then I will review the findings based on our review of the SACOG's plan as well as the draft EIR, and which are also outlined in your draft comment letter before you today. And then we'll end with a discussion and council action.
And I just want to point out, Harriet, for the members, that a copy of the presentation is included in your additional materials binder in front of you, and there should be copies out on the table for the members of the public.
Okay, before we dive in, I wanted to go over some planning terms that the Delta Reform Act references so that we all have a common understanding. The first is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. MPOs are designated by the Federal Transit Agency. They receive federal funding to carry out transportation planning for the metropolitan areas. And as an MPO, they represent localities in urbanized areas with 50,000 people or greater. And SACOG is the MPO for the Sacramento region. The subject of our discussion today will be largely based on the SACOG's regional plan, also known as the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, or MTP-SCS. It's a lot of letters in there. Senate Bill 375 requires MPOs to prepare a sustainable community strategy, and that SCS is a regional growth strategy in terms of land use. And the MTP portion of it is a regional transportation plan. So by linking transportation and land use, it helps the state reach its greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And this regional plan is required to be updated every 4 years. So SACOG, as the MPO, prepares the MTP SCS for the Sacramento 6-county region and the 22 cities within it. Portions of Yolo and Sacramento counties are in the Delta within the SACOG region. And so today we'll be discussing the 2020 plan that represents the second update to the original plan that was adopted in 2012. I should also mention that there are two other MPOs within the Delta. The first is the San Joaquin Council of Governments. They are the MPO for the San Joaquin County. They also have a long-range regional plan called the Regional Transportation Plan and SCS. It was last updated in 2018. And then we also have the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, who's the MPO for the Greater Bay Area. And their regional plan is called the Plan Bay Area 2050, and they're just beginning to update it now. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the Delta Reform Act and how it defines the council's regional planning authority. So the Delta Reform Act requires that regional planning documents have to be consistent with the Delta Plan, and that we can review and provide input and advice on the regional plan, and that's to include, but not be limited to, consistency with ecosystem restoration needs, and whether land set aside for the natural resources protection are sufficient to meet those needs in the Delta. The Delta Reform Act also requires MPOs preparing the regional transportation plan that includes land within the primary and secondary zone of the Delta, which SACOG's plan does, to consult with the council. So we met several times with SACOG staff in this last year. Our January and April meetings really were focused on the MTP SCS and the preferred land use scenario. And that scenario defines where growth will and will not occur within the region. Our August session meeting really focused on our comments that we provided on the notice of preparation to prepare an EIR. So consistency between the Delta Plan and SACOG's regional plan is important for many reasons. First, a project consistent with the MTP SCS located in the secondary zone is not subject to our covered actions process. So it's critical that we work with staff on a regular basis between SACOG and council to ensure that development proposed or designated in the regional plan is consistent with the Delta Plan. SACOG is also the Transportation and Land Use Authority in the region. They work regularly with local jurisdictions to determine the regional growth strategy. And lastly, through coordination, we've been able to share data between SACOG and the council. So with that setting, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to James, who will review the 2020 MTP SES and its relationship to the Delta.
Great, thanks, Harriet. And thanks again for having us. I'm James Corliss. I'm the Executive Director of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG. I'm joined by Clint Hulson, as Harriet said. We're just talking a little bit about the geography of the Delta and how many of our geographies actually no longer conform to boundaries that we drew 150 years ago. I did actually work for MTC down in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I've got most of this covered, and I will just, in terms of my experience, just tell you also, I think next year we're going to be hosting with the Bay Area MTC and the San Joaquin COG a mega regional summit, because our economy now is actually 26 counties, if not more, and the ties that draw us between here, tie us, transportation in particular, us, the Bay Area, San Joaquin, between Capital Corridor Service, ACE Service, I-80. These are increasingly critical ties from an economic perspective. So just to give you that heads up, Harriet did a great job of introducing this. I will tell you, there's a lot in our plan that, if you're not steeped in this stuff, will sound like a different language. We throw acronyms around and terms, and please, if you have questions that are absolutely basic, let me know. I'll work on that. It has to be 5 letters or more, so I'll get back to you. Okay, so Harriet gave you a great setup, and I want to try to step back a little bit, because I know your interest is in the Delta and Delta protection and the overlap between our planning efforts here, and to make sure we're consistent. But I'm 2 years on the job, and I worked in the Bay Area for a long time, but I've worked in cities around the country. And what I hope this transportation plan is that we're moving towards adoption by the end of November is a wake-up call to our 6-county region saying we have to do things differently. Not only if we're going to survive economically, but if we're going to survive in terms of environment, in terms of social equity. So there's a sort of a triple bottom line layer on this. And we start, I'm going to give you 4 principles that are coming out of the plan that may seem kind of like apple pie, but are actually really important. And we start with land use. We start actually with growth and development, a transportation plan that starts based on how are we going to grow as a 6-county region? And we think part of that is about building vibrant places for today's and tomorrow's residents. We have a lot of growth in front of us as a 6-county region. We have a blueprint plan that I hope you're aware of that was developed back in 2004 that still guides a lot of our future growth for this region, that was signed off on bottom up by local governments. But I'll tell you that the aspiration of our blueprint to preserve farmland, to do not just urban but suburban infill development, more walkable communities, we're not hitting the mark on that. I just want to be very honest. We are not trending. We're developing more farmland than we said we would. So there's some warning signs we have to pay attention to. But this is an important one in terms of developing vibrant, walkable places, not just downtown and midtown Sacramento, but our small towns. We have Ileton in our region, and we're really happy to see and be working with them actually very closely on redeveloping their downtown and making sure it's the kind of place where you can live, work, and play without having to travel too far. We, by state law, we are also, as Harriet said, we work on, don't control, but we work on land use and housing issues. And I would note that in this MTP SES, I think is very clear that we're in a housing crisis. We have been underproducing. We got hit by the recession really hard. We need to be building about 11,000 housing units a year in our 6-county region. At the bottom of the recession, we were down around 2,000. We've come back up in the last couple of years, but we have been slower to recover than most regions, and so we have a housing crisis, and that plays out in the rent increases and everything else that you see. So our challenge, one of our many challenges, is to figure out how we grow and how we build more housing and provide more housing options that are affordable and also fit into a sustainable community strategy that doesn't fuel sprawl. I'll skip over this, but this is an old mall in Lakewood, Colorado, just outside Denver, and I often tell our folks we have to, especially in our region, and we think Sunrise Mall and Citrus Heights, have to begin thinking about things like this. Lakewood was a suburb, never had a historic downtown outside Denver, got a light rail extension to it, and said we got to do something different. This mall went bankrupt in the 1990s. It was the most successful mall in the Denver region in the 60s. It eventually went bankrupt, and today this is what this mall looks like. They basically put a grid in, and this became Lakewood's new downtown. And they did it on the footprint of an old super block, 1 mile by 1 mile shopping mall. We have so many retail corridors in our region, old arterial corridors that crisscross our region. We've got to think creatively about how we might repurpose this space. Once a lot of our retail, we believe in retail, but we're going to have a lot of empty space coming up in the next decade. We've got to think thoughtfully about how we might reuse and infill those corridors. Again, this is the site of the old mall, which is now a 24/7 destination. Our plan is very clear that if you add up all the wants of our local governments all around, and this is not to criticize any one of them or say that you don't have really important needs and we need to fix our existing infrastructure, but we cannot afford to pay for all the things we say we want. And as a region, and again, coming from the Bay Area, we are so different than the Bay Area in terms of our access to resources. We don't have the sales taxes, the bridge tolls. We don't have the revenue here, nor will we have much more. We've got to get smarter about how we pay for transportation. Our plan actually envisions a future after the gas tax, because we don't think that's going to last maybe 10 or 12 more years, because if we go to hybrids and electric cars, you're not paying any tax as you go. So we have to come up with a smarter way to actually have a user fee that pays for our transportation network. We're working very closely with Caltrans and the state, and we'd like to actually launch a pretty innovative pilot program that envisions a future after the gas tax. And in addition, these are some of the pricing strategies we're looking at. We're probably the largest region in the United States without any kind of express lane or toll facilities. Zero. We don't have anything. And we think this is actually a really good way, not just to allow people to pay in. If you're running late for a doctor's appointment or pick up your kid from childcare, these kind of express lanes also are a great transit strategy. We want a network of these express lanes that also function as HOV lanes to connect the region and allow express buses to zip down them free from traffic. This is our, if you can see the photo there, this is the Ollie autonomous shuttle that was launched at Sac State earlier this year. It's now running around a Rancho Cordova business park because as much of a double-edged sword as autonomous technology and transportation is, we do believe that the future will be autonomous. It'll take us a while to get there, and we've got to be smart about how we deploy that autonomous technology. We're much more interested in shared autonomous transportation than we are solo autonomous transportation or even zero passenger autonomous cars, because that is one of the potential futures if we're not careful. Again, we're trying to be a test bed. Actually, for the state of California, we think we're the perfect kind of place to test a lot of these things. We're right in front of the Air Resources Board, the state capitol, the legislature, and I would argue is really setting global auto policy. And so we want to be the place that actually takes a lot of the tech out of Silicon Valley, but tries it with real people in real places. This is the VIA microtransit in West Sacramento. We are really thrilled about this program because it's point-to-point transportation. It goes, it's basically a sort of a super shuttle that's run by an app. It gets you from point A to point B, and as a father of 3 teenagers, I wish I had this in my community because I'm the chauffeur. It's a 6-passenger, or 6 to 8. I'll be clear, we're not getting 6 to 8 a trip right yet, so we are getting sometimes multiple rides. It needs to be a clean air vehicle. This is a pilot project, but I give West Sacramento a lot of credit for it. And frankly, we've got senior citizens that are telling us stories of being able to buy ice cream at the grocery store for the first time ever because it took them 3 buses and an hour to get home. And it's 13 and up. So again, as the father of teenagers, I would put my kid on this microtransit, and I'd be much happier. I want to talk a little bit about the bread and butter of what we do in transportation on a daily basis, which is really worry about the existing system that we've spent 100 years building and whether that's in a state of good repair. And here you can see this is actual data from our 6-county region. We are sliding down this curve, which is a dangerous curve to slide down. And that is we went from just about between good and at risk on our pavement quality in the region. We're sliding down there on a 10-year basis. We think we're making some dent in that because of Senate Bill 1, but it's not a big enough dent. All right, just a few more, and I want to get to some maybe specifics in terms of the Delta, but because this is such an important document and a plan, we want to just try to give you some of the highlights. This is one approach, a strategy around how we might think about transportation that's different about how we used to. I mentioned the last slide on the sliding down the curve of pavement quality. Same is true for our transit system. Buses, trains, they're coming to the end of their useful life. I would tell you that this triangle here, so fix it first is take care of what you got. The blue second wedge in the middle is really about being smarter, about how we provide mobility. It's operations, it's technology, it's the stuff I've showed you in the previous slides. And then finally that green, the very green is we have to be very thoughtful about where we expand capital capacity in our transportation network, both for roads and for transit. I'm a huge believer in mass transit, but I'll tell you I don't think we can afford all the desires to expand light rail and extend light rail around the region. It's just too expensive. So this may have been a decade ago more like a box, a square, and we thought we had that much money. And now what we're telling the region is we're actually more of a triangle. We don't have the resources we thought we have. We have to be much more strategic, and we have to prioritize. And that's a little bit of our very simplified approach. So let's get a little bit to the issues around the Delta. If we can follow our plan and follow our sustainable community strategy, so the last 3 letters of that acronym are very important. That is the growth strategy in the plan. If we can follow that, we will be following basically a plan to really prioritize filling in development in existing developed areas. We'll be following a plan to prioritize infill, not just in urban areas, but along these suburban corridors. And we will be being very cautious and careful about where we do greenfield development. In terms of the Delta, and I think your staff may provide more comments, I don't believe we have any conflicts with your existing plans in terms of growth and development. And I would even say, too, that I think we have a lot of exciting initiatives. I've mentioned to a couple of you that we're launching out of this, one of which is a new strategic plan to connect every city and county in our region by trails, biking and walking trails. We have some of those built in some places, but it is not cohesive yet. And I believe we need to brand that thing and have a strategic plan and then go out and get it funded because it is a very cost-effective way of providing tourism. Biking, walking, it relates to health, it relates to a lot of the sustainability goals that we have. In addition to this transportation plan and SES, and I mentioned a little bit of this and hinted at it on the mega region topic, we are working very closely with the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, the Metro Chamber, and Valley Vision on an economic prosperity strategy for the region. Because from an economic perspective, and the good news is here, I don't believe there's a lot of daylight between our economic strategy and our environmental strategy. But from an economic perspective, we need to be intentional about the economic clusters that we want to support. We had the Brookings Institution come here a year and a half ago and give us a sort of an economic stress test, if you will, as a region. And basically what they said is if they're the economic doctor, they said, I've got good news and bad news for you. The good news is you look great, and your numbers the last couple of years look really good. You're low unemployment, high GDP, people are moving here, jobs are moving here. But long-term, structurally in your economy, you've got some issues. One is economic disparity and inequalities. Another is a heavy reliance on government for your economic future. And if you don't pay attention to those things, you will hit bottom in the next recession just as hard as you did before. So we're trying to be intentional around an economic strategy, and I think we want to put this slide in here because the number one cluster, which many of you know already, but I think is what they brought and raised is food, food systems, ag tech, to really capitalize on the fact that we have incredibly fertile soils, that we have UC Davis and increasingly other institutions of higher education, and that we could commercialize and actually make this a better, stronger part of our economy. And we should be doing the transportation projects to support these kinds of clusters. So I think that was it in terms of that. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any bridges in the Delta under your purview?
Yeah, we do. There are quite a few bridges that we've got sitting in the Delta, inclusive of, your smaller one-lane bridges with a culvert running underneath them. Our plan is not expanding bridges in the Delta. You might have a few bridges where it's a one-lane now and it becomes a two-lane. The priority for the bridges in the Delta, as well as the rest of the transportation infrastructure in the Delta, is to rehabilitate and maintain it, bring it up to modern standards. There are a number of structurally deficient bridges in the Delta, so what our plan is focusing on is bringing those back up to a much better standard.
I have one question. I think from what I followed, there aren't many big plans of transit, rail transit creation or any of that, right?
I'm sorry.
In your plans, you're not seeing big plans for rail transit development in your
Rail
areas?
transit? So let me be clear. I think I think we have to be very mindful of how much we can afford to expand the light rail system here. There are some expansions. So as we speak, we had a streetcar proposal for actually would cross the Sacramento River from West Sacramento to downtown. The bids came in very, very high, way too high on that streetcar proposal. And so the cities of Sacramento and West Sacramento are currently re-envisioning and may be advancing a proposal to have a shorter segment that's light rail across the rivers. In our plan for planning is an extension from the Cosumnes River College down to Elk Grove. We're studying that and looking at whether rail is the best technology or that should be some sort of a bus connection. There is rail to the airport, but I would tell you that that's another one where we're wondering if the cost is now worth it. We can get an express lane up I-5 and run an express bus up there cheaper and quicker, frankly. It's going to be about a 50-minute ride from downtown Sacramento to the airport. And we think we can give you more competitive service. But there is, we think, a really good expansion opportunity to Natomas. So I don't want to say there's no opportunity for rail transit. It's a little bit like that top of the pyramid I showed, which is we just have to be thoughtful about how and where and why we do that. We need to get supportive land use around the transit system. And we're really big believers that we could expand our bus system big time. We could do things that are pretty low tech to prioritize buses, bus rapid transit, signalization, prepay the fare. And these express lanes, if we can get the network of express lanes running express bus, we think a very quick bus network that would actually be competitive with the auto or quicker would be transformational for this region.
Thank you.
Madam Chair. First, I want to thank you for being here because this is, this is really fascinating for us to understand this, not just the connection to the Delta, but also we're not new, but we're relatively new to the regional planning arena and really kind of appreciate you working with our staff and kind of, the fact that you came in here consistent with the Delta plan is really important to us. And I guess it's not just you, it's the general purpose governments and their land use planning. So, that's a great story, and we want to spread that story elsewhere in the Delta, so thank you. You mentioned the food, agriculture, and agricultural tech kind of cluster, industrial cluster, and transportation improvements to support that cluster. Can you talk a little bit, like what is that? What kind of transportation improvements would better support that cluster?
Yeah, and we're working on that, and we have a program called the Rural Urban Connection Strategy, or RUCS, which I think is an excellent program that is actually trying to work with our cities and counties to identify those kinds of projects. I would tell you, I think right now, if we think about goods movement, right, and we look at all the smaller rural roads around the region, I think, our default is often to say, well, they're all goods movement roads because they all have a truck running on them. And what we're trying to do, not inconsistent with that pyramid, is to say, but what really are the projects that would actually have the biggest bang for the buck? And it could be as basic as some of our incredible farms up in Sutter County, just the ones that I've happened to go visit. You've got to drive down a dirt road for miles and miles, and when it rains in the winter, that farm is sometimes cut off from the transportation network, and simply paving that road would be actually a boon. There are others, if I think about Yolo County, right? We've got a lot of safety issues, truck issues, combination of truck traffic, some tourism traffic, some bicycles, where we don't have to, and we cannot afford to make these things freeways where we have 2-lane rural roads, but putting shoulders and truck turning lanes and thinking a lot about goods movement. And then just to get beyond transportation, but only just, because I'm a big believer that broadband is transportation. We're just moving bits rather than people or stuff. We need to double down and really understand how we can get a much more reliable, high-speed internet service out to our agricultural areas.
And that applies to the agricultural areas within the Delta, within the legal Delta. But it seems like funding is a pretty big challenge.
Yep.
There's not a local sales tax that goes towards it. I'm from Southern California, so not as familiar with the details. So where does the funding is just, the share of the gas tax, the county, unincorporated?
For all the transportation projects?
Yeah.
I mean, Clint, do you want to roughly, it's, like everything else, I'm sorry, in transportation, it's incredibly complicated. I don't know, how we got to this place, but yeah. But it's largely, what's interesting, if I take it's largely the gas tax and sales tax. How we have funded transportation, sales tax has been the last 30 years, gas tax has been 100 years, coming up on 100-year anniversary. And both of those fund sources are wobbly, to say the least. We have, how much is user fees in our plan, or?
So overall, and this is different in Southern California and in the Bay Area because there are some additional programs there that raise revenue. So more than half of the money supporting our plan is coming from fuel taxes, either state or federal fuel taxes. Another 15% of that is coming out of sales taxes. Maybe a little bit more than that is coming out of sales taxes. Now, Sacramento County has its own local option sales tax, similar to what you get in Southern California. They're the only county right now that has that, that goes directly to transportation. Then the balance of that, and this doesn't help in terms of the Delta, except for some of those areas in the secondary zone where we do have, infill opportunities, is development pays for a lot of new roadways. And so in a plan where we're trying to preserve the open space and the agricultural communities that we have, we're not seeing a ton of development fee coming in to pay for transportation. And in the infill areas where we do want to see development happen, it's a lot harder to raise enough from developer impact fees to pay for that, because a lot of that infrastructure is old and it costs a lot more to tear infrastructure out and update it than it does to build new. Where you're building new, it's in the greenfield areas, and that's where we're trying to, strike a balance. And so that is where the pricing strategies that James talked about come into play. So if we're able to start looking at tolling, or if we're able to get away from a fuel-based system to a pay-as-you-go type of a system, that's where we see opportunity to start raising money to invest and plow back into the existing system, to undo some of that long deferred maintenance and deferred attention to infrastructure, especially in the rural areas of our region.
So for within the Delta, the pyramid you showed is a prioritization of where you put your resources. So they're really sort of subject to getting some priority to put transportation projects in that area.
Right.
And competing with the rest of the 6 counties.
And to be clear, I might liken, now you've got councils of governments and MPOs all across, MPOs almost all across the state. They're largely the largest populated areas, and council of governments everywhere throughout the state. But we are actually not an operating or implementing agency, right? So Caltrans owns, as you know, owns a lot of the road network in the Delta and is responsible for investing. That's cities and counties, public works, right? So in some ways, we're almost an investor. So we figure out where do we put our limited resources and where are we going as a region and how do we actually think long-term. And we've got to work with our partners. And the other piece that I keep being reminded of is, as a regional agency, and this is particular California law from the 1990s, regional agencies actually have a suballocated portion of funds. So Governor Wilson in the 1990s put more money at the regional level because every region is so different and California is huge. But we still only control 7% of all of the funds that flow through our plan. Only 7% actually comes through SACOG and our board, which is all the cities and counties to make decisions on. Caltrans has money, locals have money. So we have to make sure that everybody is truly on board with our plan if we're going to be successful.
Do we have any other questions, council members? No? Harriet, you look like you were going to say something.
Yes, I have a little bit more. Just
Okay.
bear with me, probably another 5 minutes or so. I wanted to review the findings that staff have found in the comment letter, and also wanted to start off really quickly. We reviewed the notice of preparation to the EIR back later this spring, submitted comments to SACOG, and they did incorporate all of our comments into the draft EIR. So we thank you for that. Let's see. Okay, now on to consistency. So SACOG's regional plan and the draft EIR were released for public review on September 19th. Again, the Delta Reform Act requires us to review and provide input on whether the regional plan is consistent with the ecosystem restoration needs. So the plan does not allocate growth or incentivize development in any of the priority habitat restoration areas. As you all are aware, the Delta plan designates 6 priority habitat restoration areas that have been largely identified for large-scale habitat restoration, and therefore we deem necessary to meet the ecosystem needs of the Delta. There are 2 priority habitat restorations specifically in the SACOG region. One is the Yolo Bypass, which passes through Yolo County, and the Cosumnes-Mokelumne confluence located at the southern edge of Sac County. No urban development is proposed or anticipated under the MTP SCS in either of those PHRAs. Also, the MTP SCS incentivized natural resource protection by, again, encouraging growth in those existing population centers within established cities and immediately adjacent to them, and really maximizing the efficiency of the existing transportation network. So no growth is proposed in the primary zone of the Delta. So with that, staff recommends that the council find the MTP SCS is not inconsistent with the ecosystem restoration needs of the Delta, and sufficient lands are set aside for natural resource protection to meet the Delta's ecosystem needs. I have 2 more findings. Secondly, council reviewed the plan to determine consistency with Delta plan policies, particularly policy DPP1, which places certain limits on new urban development in the Delta. The Delta plan requires that new residential, commercial, and industrial development be limited to certain areas within the Delta, consistent with when the Delta plan was adopted in 2013. The SACOG's plan also seeks to accommodate growth in the secondary zone. Again, none is proposed in the primary zone. And the council staff has reviewed those particular projects in the secondary zone. There are 2 new developing communities proposed and in the MTP SCS in the city of West Sacramento. Those areas we've determined are consistent with what was assumed back in 2013 when the Delta plan was adopted. Those 2 projects, if you're interested, are called Yarborough and River Park. So based on that, the staff recommends that the council find the MTP SCS is not inconsistent with the Delta Plan Policy DPP1 that limits new urban development in the Delta. And lastly, back to those transportation investments that we talked about. Again, the plan includes a variety of transportation investments in both the urban and rural areas of the Delta. Much of it includes trail improvements, specifically to the Clarksburg Branch Trail in the city of West Sacramento. There's also replacement of structurally deficient bridges, as we discussed, restoring pavement and redesigning streetscapes to, create a more pedestrian and bike-friendly environment and transportation route. So these planned transportation investments will improve the capacity and the safety of the roads and highways within the Delta and are consistent with the Delta Plan recommendations. So with that, staff recommends that the council find recommended transportation projects in the MTP SCS is not inconsistent with the Delta Plan. So with that, there are two things that the staff recommends that the council find. The 2020 MTP SCS is not inconsistent with the Delta Plan in general, and the staff recommends that council give approval to submit the 2020 MTP SCS and draft EIR comment letter that you have in your packet today. So I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Ken?
I was just going to move this recommendation.
Well, are there any public comments? No public comments. Okay, well then,
So move the staff recommendation and I guess it's findings and recommendations, which are slides 12 through 15 in the PowerPoint.
And Chair, if I could, I would just note those findings that are in the presentation are also described in the comment letter that's the second
yeah,
attachment
it's a good comment letter.
for Agenda 5. And what staff is seeking is essentially approval of the council to submit that comment letter inclusive of those findings to SACOG.
Move all of those things.
Okay. Oscar seconds, so motion by Councilmember Weinberg, second by Councilmember Villegas. And I think that we are going to send that comment letter. And we have to, oh, yes. Vote.
Weinberg, aye?
Marani and I?
Fiorini, aye?
Tatai and I.
Villegas, aye.
Great.
Can I make
Oh,
a comment?
one comment.
James, Clint, I want to thank you, your staff, for the work that you've put into this. There's clearly a mutual respect between our agency and yours. There is a recognition of your authority and ours, and this has all come together in this approval by the council. We need more of that in government. We need more of that as the state and the local agencies work together for the good. And so thank you for setting a good example, and we respect your authority and wish you the best with your limited resources as you move forward.
That's a good segue, Randy. If I could just also thank you and Clint, James and Clint. I'm not surprised to be, a little bullish on this. The work that you've done, the work that the staff has done with the 6-county region, herding cats some days, trying to manage a large board with council, city, county representatives, to put together a master transportation planning document like this. It didn't just happen by accident or overnight. It took a lot of very deep thinking, thoughtful consideration. And so the fact that it's consistent with the Delta Plan isn't completely surprising, but it's incredibly important as you now think about our transportation planning efforts and the infrastructure embedded in that now has spilled into the water world. And the whole regional sustainability efforts that are now sort of embarking on us in California. And now the notion of actually talking about, mega districts, where now the footprint is getting bigger and bigger because people are traveling further and further, and they're not really worried about whether they're going from one city to one county or crossing jurisdictional boundaries. They're just moving where they need to get to be successful. And so I'm glad to see that we've actually started on this foot, as Randy said, on the same sort of footprint, that we are now being good stewards of our limited resources. But so I'm not totally surprised, but I'm thankful that at least at this initial conversation, we're able to say that it's not inconsistent with the Delta plan. So thanks for your good work.
And I'm very excited about the trails. So, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. So, council members, on to agenda item 6, adoption of the September 26, 2019 meeting summary.
Second?
Okay, motion by Councilmember Gatto, second by Councilmember Maranian. And we'll start with a vote.
Weinberg, aye.
Marani and I?
Fiorini, aye?
Tatai and I.
Villegas, aye.
And meeting summary adopted. On to agenda item 7. For the chair's report, I just want to give you a preview of the upcoming Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting. I'm very excited about this meeting because we meaning the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee members, the leaders of 18 state, federal, and regional agencies, will be discussing some pretty heavy-duty developments occurring in the water world, an open discussion of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries Service biological opinions, the objectives of that effort. We'll also be discussing the objectives of the water resilience portfolio, the voluntary agreements, and the Bay Delta Water Quality Plan update. And I am hoping that in having a very open and transparent discussion of these huge processes that will affect the Delta for quite some time, by discussing the objectives of each of these efforts and the purpose of each of them, we will be able to hear from our federal partners and our sister agencies possible similar objectives or maybe even the same objectives. And I'd like to document those objectives, and this would help reveal some that we could use to inform management questions that we put to our science efforts. So it should be an interesting discussion. Also, at the DPIC meeting, we'll be talking about the science funding white paper and the actions being recommended by the working group that is developing actions to implement that white paper. And then there'll be some lightning presentations, very short presentations to give progress on DPIC agency efforts. So am I missing anything, Amanda? So that pretty much covers it. The meeting is November 4 from 1 till 3:30. We're trying to keep the meetings a little shorter since we're having more frequent DPIC meetings. And it'll be here in this room. Oh, the Galleria next door. In the Library Galleria. So for the rest of the chair's report, I'm hoping that maybe John and Randy could very quickly, just very briefly, give us a few highlights of the Estuary conference. Or is that part of your? Okay. Oh, okay. Well, then we'll skip that. And that's it for the chair's report. Unless Randy. No? Okay. So on to the executive officer's report, agenda item 8.
Thank you so much. The council will be reconvening tomorrow morning for a retreat with a focus on communications and future work planning. The retreat will be held at the Sierra Health Foundation's Capitol Meeting Room on Garden Highway at 9 o'clock here in Sacramento, and it's open to the public. The meeting will not be webcast. We expect to proceed until about 12:15 tomorrow. So thank you for mentioning the State of the Estuary Conference. Earlier this week, I attended and numerous council staff presented and participated in this conference. It was held in Oakland at the Scottish Rite Center on Monday and Tuesday. The council is the premier sponsor of this biennial conference, and it's held in the off years of the Delta Science Conference. This conference brings a focus to management challenges and focus on the ecological health of the entire Bay Delta estuary. And it's really important in building connections between those who focus on work in the Delta versus those who work and focus in the estuary, and making sure that those are, that science is being shared, that management strategies are being shared, and that we are working in pursuit of the health of the overall estuary. In fact, there were a few presenters during the plenary session at this conference, including Jim Klern, a renowned scientist who works on Delta issues, and Felicia Marcus, former chair of the State Water Board, who suggested that we modify the One Delta, One Science motto that we live by here at the Delta Stewardship Council to be One Estuary, One Science. And I definitely understand the desire to see themselves reflected in that motto as well and see value in that. So I thought that was definitely food for thought. It's worth highlighting here that what many of you have probably seen in the news this week related to federal rules that govern operations of water projects in the Delta. There's some exciting news happening on that front. And forgive my use of jargony terms that follow, because I really couldn't figure out a way how to describe this process without referring to some of them, but I will try to define them. So in August 2016, under the Obama administration, the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Water Resources jointly requested what's called a reinitiation of consultation with both of the federal fish agencies. So that's the National Marine Fisheries Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And this is on the topic of coordinated long-term operations of the Central Valley and state water projects. This consultation is required under the Endangered Species Act if a federal agency believes that a project or a change in a project, which is the case here, could adversely affect a listed species or its habitat. And so in this case, we're talking about Delta smelt, green sturgeon, salmon, and steelhead species. So subsequent to that request by both DWR and the Bureau of Reclamation for reconsultation, the federal agencies then, a few years later, issued what's called a biological assessment, which is essentially their scientific take on the matter and the new proposed operating criteria, and then a biological opinion about whether the project is likely to jeopardize listed species or their habitat. So in the biological opinion, the services concluded that the Bureau of Reclamation's proposed operations will not jeopardize listed species or adversely impact their habitat due to what they characterize as investments in science, habitat restoration, conservation facilities like hatcheries, and other protective measures that they've built into the revised operations plan. You may recall that we sent a comment letter earlier in the process emphasizing the importance of using sound science. So this reconsultation was requested in recognition of changing conditions in the Delta, particularly more frequent drought conditions, but also under the assertion that new science was available that should be used in considering how to govern the operations of these projects. So the next steps for this are that new operations could begin in January after the environmental process concludes and the record of decision is signed. It's estimated to cost about $1.5 billion over 10 years of implementation for these new operating rules. So there are fact sheets that are available on Fish and Wildlife Service's website, which I highly recommend and make this much more understandable. One of those has been included in your packet that's titled Changes to Delta Operations. There are also copies of that out on the table. There are also fact sheets on cold water management and what the implications of the new rules are for cold water management for the benefit of salmon. And they have an entire fact sheet called Science-Driven Decisions and Operations that gives a little bit more detail about how they plan to use science in evaluating the effectiveness of new rules. Are there any questions about that? I could try my best to answer them. This is also going to be one of the items that we discuss or hear about at the forthcoming Delta Plan Interagency Committee meeting, as there will be representatives there from the Bureau and the Fish Services and DWR. So the Council sent 2 comment letters this month. Both are included in your board packet, and they are listed on the active projects list. One was to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board for the supplemental EIR for the American River Watershed Common Features project. And the second is to the San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission regarding their notice of preparation on an EIR for the Valley Rail Sacramento Extension project. That project seeks to expand rail service throughout the Delta region and the San Joaquin Valley, and the letter encourages the commission to meet with the council in early consultation. Coincidentally, today, on October 24th, the Central Valley Flood Protection Board submitted their certification of consistency for the American River Watershed Common Features project. The Flood Board found that the proposed project is consistent with the Delta Plan and specifically consistent with 8 Delta Plan policies. The project is focused on levee improvements and flood control and includes a number of proposed measures. There's detail available on our website in the filing. And these proposed actions would be implemented on stretches of levees along the east side of the Sacramento River, between its confluence with the American River and the town of Freeport. Several erosion repair sites are also included along the American River outside of the Delta. So the public review and appeal period for the project is officially open now from today, the October 24th, through Monday, November 25th. And again, more details are available on our website. We do not have a legal update for today. I want to draw your attention, in addition to the active projects list in your binder, there's also a budget update and a contract update. I will not speak to those, but I'm happy to answer questions at any time. There are 3 new hires at the council, so I wanted to recognize and welcome those staff. So our new Chief Information Officer, John Kempwood, comes to us from the Secretary of State's office, where he was the manager of their systems engineering section. He brings over 13 years of experience as an IT manager in the public and private sectors, has a degree in statistics from UC Berkeley, and we're really excited to have him here leading our IT team. Pascal Gertler joins us as a senior environmental scientist. Pascal comes from the Department of Water Resources, where she worked on fisheries monitoring in the Yolo Bypass. She has her master's in aquatic and fishery sciences from the University of Washington, UW, and her BS in environmental studies from UC Santa Barbara. Finally, Annie Merritt joins us as our new AmeriCorps Civic Spark Climate Fellow. Annie graduated from UC Davis with a BS in Environmental Science and Management, and she's going to be assisting us with outreach for our Delta Climate Change Vulnerability Assessment with a focus on outreach to disadvantaged communities in the Delta region. And unless there are any questions, that concludes my executive officer's report.
Thank you, Jessica. Any questions for Jessica? No? Okay.
One quick question. The November 4th meeting is open to public, right?
Yes. It will also be webcast. It will be webcast as well.
Okay, on to our lead scientist report.
Great. Thank you, Chair Tatayan. I want to just add a little bit about the state of the estuary, because I think it was such a big effort that we put into it. I think it really was a great success. I've been to many of the State of the Estuary meetings, and I heard from many colleagues they thought it was the best one they'd ever been to. And I think it really was valuable in that there was much better integration and thought about Bay Delta connections. As Jessica mentioned, there was a full session on Bay Delta connections. For the plenary, there's about 700 people that attend the meeting, so it's really a great opportunity for people to hear about that. Actually, Eric Vink also presented from the Delta Protection Commission about the National Heritage Area, and so it was a good opportunity to spread the word about that. From the council staff, Yumiko Hannaberry put together and moderated a great session on forward-looking science that has direct connections to the DPIC discussion coming up. Ron Meltzer gave an overview of the ecosystem amendment and highlighted sort of not just forward-looking science, but forward-looking policy for challenging issues that we face going forward. Andrew Schwartz gave a great presentation on the work that he did at DWR on modeling that really highlights the modeling approach that's being integrated into the climate change vulnerability assessment, and I think he probably had the best takeaway line from the whole conference. He said, there's no such thing, talking about modeling scenarios, he said, there's no such thing as a worst-case scenario. Things could always get worse. And I heard that quoted multiple times after he used it. Yes, you did. And Jessica Law participated in a panel on governance issues related to climate change, and I think gave one of the best, most succinct overviews I've ever heard of what the council does and why, what the diverse range of things that the council is involved in and why it's important and how it connects across the entire estuary. So it really was a great, the council was really well represented. In addition to that, there were, I counted up this morning, 9 poster presentations from council staff, so it really was great work. I think the one estuary, one science, or the Bay Delta connections was one of the really big messages. There also was a big focus on equity and inclusivity, so really addressing that, or building on the social science issues that the council and the science program is really pushing in the Delta. There was lots of discussion about climate change and resilience. I think that was, the theme probably throughout the whole conference that really connects up with all the work we're doing on the vulnerability assessment. So it really was a great meeting. And part of the meeting also was the State of the Estuary report that was released at the meeting. And that is, there's a summary in your, the additional materials binder on the left, in the little packet there on the left. The State of the Estuary report is a report that comes out about every 3 to 4 years. It came out last in 2015. The 2019 update is a interim update. It's not a complete update. And it's something that the council, along with the meeting, the council is one of the main supporters of the State of the Estuary report, along with the San Francisco Estuary Partnership. There are, and if you look at your this, you'll see that some of the highlights there actually go along with what the themes of the conference were, linking conditions of the estuary to human aspects, human use of the estuary, and human health and social issues, and also landscape resilience. So there's 5 indicators that were looked at there in the report: water flow, the condition of tidal marsh, fish, beneficial floods, and urban water use. And not really any dramatic changes from the 2015 report in terms of those indicators. There also were some new emerging indicators that the report is just beginning to look at and that will be incorporated much more completely in the upcoming report that will probably be in 3 to 4 years. Subsidence and elevation issues is one of the emerging issues or emerging indicators that definitely is of lots of interest here in the Delta. Shoreline resilience, and then they also looked at urban green space, which may not be so important in the Delta, but I think probably will be also addressed in looking at ag issues. And there's a piece there in the full report about not just urban green space, but working lands and the use of working lands. So any questions on the conference or on the Estuary, State of the Estuary report?
Yeah, I just had one question regarding the highlights of the significance of one estuary, one science versus one Delta, one science. From what you took from it, why is it so important?
Well, I think what was highlighted, what Felicia really highlighted was the need for coordination and the need for cooperation and not sort of combat issues, but really how can we work together across borders and across disciplines to improve that. From the science perspective, I think both Rachel and Jim highlighted that if you only look at things on a small scale, you don't get the full picture. And Jim highlighted how large-scale factors like ocean temperatures affect the fish community in the bay. Local issues like diversions affect fish communities. So thinking across a mix of scales, if we want to manage appropriately, we have to understand those mix of factors.
So in other words, none of the water bodies could be seen as of themselves, but it should be.
Exactly.
And so this is more expanded view.
Exactly. So we really, and not to say that we're going to, try to do everything completely the same everywhere, but there's a great opportunity for improved coordination across the bay, the delta, and the watersheds, and also thinking about those marine influence as well. Any other questions? Okay, so I also wanted to mention a recent tidal marsh restoration that occurred, the Tule Red restoration that is on the edge of Sassoon Bay, right adjacent to Grizzly Bay wildlife area. And that was a covered action that the council approved, I think, 2 years ago. And
Submitted to us, and no one appealed.
yes, thank you. And so that is a 420-acre restoration project. It's really focused on doing the kinds of things that are addressed in the ecosystem amendment in terms of improving land-water connections, improving food web opportunities for fish, and in particular, delta smelt in particular. And so that was a groundbreaking that took place a little over a week ago. A number of us from the staff, Luis Conrad, Ben Geske, and I were able to go, and I think it was really, it's interesting in that it was an effort funded by the state and federal contractors water agency that no longer really exists, but carried that through, and that will, the restoration will be turned over to California Department of Fish and Wildlife once it's fully completed. And so it's really a valuable step towards restoration. Yeah, and if you're interested, there's a good brochure that was distributed there at the opening. Ken, question?
Yeah, so kind of data collection now, or is there going to be a big focus on, the success criteria for Tule Red and
Yes.
those kind of things that we'll be
Yeah.
hearing about?
Yes, so there is a detailed monitoring plan that was put together, and I think it's it was unusual. I think it was an exemplary sort of design in that they really thought about, and they went through a number of iterations of how to design the site and think about the creek connectivity and other issues to promote productivity and to promote connections for fish access. And it will be monitored as a project and then more incorporated into the broader regional monitoring.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then so we haven't gotten into any of things that are in the staff report, but before getting to that, I also wanted to mention that in your material, in the binder, there is a one-page handout on the delta smelt issues that was put together. And I wanted to mention that Eva Bush and Luis Conrad, who's here, really did all the work to put this together to highlight our current understanding of delta smelt, what some of the challenges are for delta smelt, the decline of the population, especially in the early 2000s. I'm going to talk about salmon life cycle modeling in just a bit, and the salmon migrate on a large scale, delta smelt to also migrate through the delta. So really understanding on the left side of the right side of the front page, there's a little diagram showing you their life cycle and their movement from freshwater in their early life stages, then down into slightly saltier areas, but they're still in really very low salinity areas. So they move around within the delta and the edge of Sassoon Bay. And what's really unusual about delta smelt is they're an annual fish. You think about annual plants that come back every year, but there aren't a lot of annual fish. They're usually longer lived, and I think that's one of the challenges for the population. So that this one-pager highlights some of those issues. Also on the back page highlights the management activities that are being done to address the decline and to try to improve conditions for the fish, including limiting impacts from the pumps in training or pulling in the juvenile fish into the pumps, restoring habitat, providing improved connectivity for food web issues. And those are mostly related to the delta smelt resiliency strategy. They were a focus of the BIOPS, the biological opinion in 2008, 2009, that, as Jessica mentioned, have just been updated. So some of these actions will likely change slightly, but in what I've looked at, I've just begun to look at the BIOP, and it's hundreds of pages long, but I don't think there's dramatic changes. The biggest change is around entrainment, in that the way they'll be managing entrainment is much more focused on real-time monitoring of fish populations rather than sort of, as what was said in some of the press releases, calendar-based approaches to limiting pumps. And that actually is interesting because, as you pointed out, Ken, it puts much more emphasis on monitoring, so we have to really be sure that we have a really effective system in place to monitor the populations and minimize potential impacts. So I would encourage you to look over that one pager. I know a lot of staff time, and the communications staff put a lot of time into thinking how we could make this effective and informative for you. So I'd love to get any feedback from you on the one pager so we could think about how we can make these available to you on additional topics that would be informative and valuable for the council. Okay, so then we are going to move into a couple articles, and the first article that we're going to discuss, Karen Kafitz, who is here, is a co-author on this paper, and this is a paper looking at the effects of the emergency drought barrier. Karen is the program manager for Science-Based Adaptive Management Unit in the science program, and since she knows the paper much better than I, she is going to give you an overview.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, council members. So I'm going to talk to you about a paper that came out in September of this year on the ecological effects of the 2015 emergency drought barrier. And yes, it's 2019 and we're talking about 2015. It takes a lot of time to do science and then to analyze the results and to write up these syntheses. What this synthesis paper does is it brings together results from multiple scientific studies that were done in 2015 and subsequently to study what the emergency drought barrier did. So I'm going to take us back in time a little bit and remind you about this management action that was taken in 2015, what it was, why we did it, touch briefly on how we studied it, and then I'll tell you about the results of our synthesis report.
And I would just want to highlight that the one pager describing this is also included in your additional binder.
Thanks, Jessica. So as I'm sure you all remember, California was facing very severe drought in 2012 to 2015, and each year of drought was depleting our freshwater supplies and reservoirs. So by 2015, reservoir supplies were very limited, and there were concerns that we would not have enough freshwater in upstream reservoirs to keep salt water from intruding into the central delta. Usually during a dry summer, freshwater reservoir releases are used to keep salt at bay. So in order to protect water quality in the central delta and at the state and federal water projects, the Department of Water Resources took an emergency action. They did some modeling studies and decided that they could construct a temporary rock barrier in the central delta that would cut off the saltwater stream at a really pivotal point, and with this one rock barrier, they would be able to protect reservoir water. So if you look at the figure on the right side of this one pager, there's a little schematic describing this. So in the top frame, you see the no barrier condition where salt water comes in from the west, it comes in from the bay, and it penetrates directly into Frank's Tract, which is marked there with an FT. And the Central and Central Valley and State Water Projects are south of Frank's Tract. And so once salty water enters Frank's Tract, it would then go to the pumps and potentially contaminate drinking water and agricultural water supplies. In the frame just below that, you see the barrier condition, where the barrier across False River blocks that salt water from being able to enter the central delta, and instead the salty water is pushed up further into the San Joaquin and Sacramento rivers, but not to the point where it's deleterious to water quality. So that's why we built the barrier. Now I'm going to touch on how we studied the barrier. So the Department of Water Resources was really interested in demonstrating that this was an effective action, and they invested in 10 additional water quality monitoring stations so that they could confirm not only that they were meeting their compliance standards, but they could also study how this salt water moving up the rivers changed the water quality landscape in the region. This manipulation, this action also could be a large-scale experiment. It's an action different than most anything else that we've done in recent years to manage drought, and it affected the hydrodynamics in a large region. So the Delta Science Program convened a group of state and federal agency scientists and university scientists together to brainstorm about what the potential ecological effects of this manipulation might be. There were several researchers in that group that proposed research projects to the Delta Science Program, and we funded almost $900,000 worth of research projects looking into the ecological effects. And that's what we have synthesized and published in this study. For the rest of this page, I touch on some of the specific outcomes from that study, but rather than walk through each one of them, I'd have you flip over and look at the backside of this page. I'm just going to highlight a couple of our major findings. If you have questions about the other findings, I'm happy to entertain them. So I'm going to move to the middle box on the second page here and talk about what we learned for future barriers. So the really important finding from all of this research is that the barrier worked. It kept salt out of the state water project, and it protected water in our upstream reservoirs. It's estimated, not calculated because we can't know what it would have been like if we hadn't built the barrier, but estimated that we saved tens of millions of dollars worth of water in upstream reservoirs. For the most part, in our ecological studies, we found no harm to species or to water quality. But there was one really important exception, and that was the persistent spread of aquatic weeds. And I'll have you take a look at the box, the diagram on the right side of the page. This diagram shows you data from 2014 to 2018. This is aerial imagery of just the Franks Tract, and the light blue in this image is showing you open water, and the dark blue is showing water that has submerged aquatic weeds in it. In 2014, the top left panel, you'll see there's a large section of open water. It's thought that the high-intensity fire hose of water that enters from False River into Franks Tract rips up weeds that start to grow in that central corridor and prevents them from taking root and establishing. But in 2015, that fire hose was shut off by the barrier. So you see in the upper right image, 2015, well, that clear area, it's filled in now with weeds that have been able to take root. That was an effect that we were expecting, but what we were not necessarily expecting is that after the barrier was removed, those weeds have persisted. They've stayed at least through 2018, the last year that we have data for. They've stayed there in that formerly clear region. And it's thought that the weeds themselves, since they had time to establish, now they slow down the water that's coming through, and so they, in effect, shut off that fire hose that used to keep that area clear. So there's a persistent impact of this spread of aquatic weeds, which has effects on boating recreation, on fishing, and on the ecology. So for future barriers, we think that a really key take-home of our study is that it's important for managers to anticipate, proactively manage, and mitigate for the increased spread of aquatic weeds. That's all that I wanted to present to you today. I welcome any questions that you have on that or any other material on this page. Thank you.
Any questions? Ken?
Great report. That was really interesting and positive from protecting water quality. But it seems like, the reports out there, should we do something with that? I mean, should we issue some guidance? Are there best management practices that you need to get in there and do maintenance during the period the barrier's up? Is that some of the stuff? And, is that, instead of putting just the paper out there in the science, is there something more we can do to get that message out and recommend something to DWR and the other agencies?
So
So I'll weigh in, if I may.
I know, I just threw that out there. I didn't want to put anybody individually on
Yeah, I
the
think
spot.
that's a great point and something that we're actively thinking through, but it's also very relevant to our ongoing discussions on how to craft the updated Delta Plan ecosystem chapter amendment and what revised rules we could include in that amendment or recommendations. Notably, this was the outcome, the barrier was the outcome of a governor's executive order, which actually suspended CEQA. And in suspending CEQA also suspended the requirement that this would be a covered action under the Delta Plan. And one of the regulations in the Delta Plan and the ecosystem chapter currently is that before a project proceeds, that they have to have a plan in place so that they will reduce, avoid, or mitigate the potential for invasive aquatic or other species to take hold. So this is something that we've been focused on for the long term, and I think if we find ourselves in drought conditions again, and even before that, thinking thoughtfully, is how important it would be, even if there's an executive order in an emergency, to work with the department to make sure that actions are taken to prevent that kind of outcome.
If we were to give specific best management practices or guidance so that, not just say, hey, you have to have a plan, it's like, hey, here's an example of a plan and how you manage it, because that was my other question, was would barriers be coming to us for covered action if it wasn't done as part of an emergency regulation or declaration? And I think you just said yes.
I believe so. It would depend on the details, but probably.
Randy?
Excellent presentation, Karen. I had a front row seat as this was developing, and I recall when the representative from the Department of Water Resources came to a council meeting and said, "This is an emergency action, we've evaluated this, we're going to have to do it." At that time, Peter Goodwin, our lead scientist, recognized that although DWR and other agencies would be monitoring the results of this, nobody had included in that approach monitoring conditions before the barrier went in. And so Peter, along with USGS, scrambled around. They found telemetry from all over the country, brought it in, and put it in place before the barrier went in so that we'd have that data. A lesson learned from that is now has been applied following SAC Regional's upgrade of the regional water plan. We have Operation Baseline, which was the brainchild of the next lead scientist, Cliff Daum. So there was lessons learned from this that the Delta Science Program has been the leader in, and I think that there is a recognition now that if there is going to be some major alteration, it would be great to identify what the current conditions are so we have something to compare to when that project is implemented. So that's just because I was there when the light bulb went on that, hey, we better do this, and I watched, I think, Jessica, it was less than 2 weeks that they had pulled together the telemetry and got approval to put it out there. So kudos to the science program for engaging at that level.
Thanks for that comment, Randy. There's only so much you can fit in a presentation and on a one-pager, but I really appreciate you making that point, because one of the other take-home points from the conclusion of the paper itself is about exactly that. It's about the need for having some ongoing collection of baseline data so that when we're in an emergency situation and we take an action that's unexpected, we have some data to compare that to. And there's even a proposed mechanism in the paper to collect certain types of data and put them on the shelf. We don't need to spend a ton of resources analyzing everything, but if we're collecting information, say with a stationary piling in the Delta somewhere that does continuous monitoring, well, we have access to that information later if we need to then use it to understand a baseline condition before there's a change. And then the other thing that you mentioned is also really important, that we have adapted now our model to try and be more anticipatory. And the Operation Baseline project is a really important example of how we're doing that. And I was about a month into my job here at the Delta Science Program when I got pulled into this emergency drought barrier work. And I think it was just because I was new and I had the most capacity of any of the staff. And I remember really working hard at the time to figure out, how do we do this and how do we do it right? And I think 5 years later, we know so much more about how to do these kinds of ecological studies right. And we learned a lot by doing this, and we learned a lot by doing Operation Baseline, and we're continuing to improve our processes.
Thank you, Karen, for the presentation. So I would echo or underscore the notion that the baseline data is key going forward. I would also want to underscore your notion that anticipating the idea that we would need, or that the state would continue to need rock barriers is short-sighted. This is a classic example of what we're experiencing with a private utility that we all recognize, where power outages for the next 10 years are going to happen, in large part because the long-term vision and the need for infrastructure was avoided, rather than just saying, well, rock barriers worked. There were no major issues with it. Yeah, there's some problems, and we could probably deal with them. And I say this because I'm wearing my Delta Protection Commission hat and my county supervisor hat, whereby I remember those meetings where the initial conversation about the rock barriers were being discussed, and I'm wondering, did the final determination about where the barriers ended up, was that what was originally proposed in terms of where the barriers were going to be, or was that adjusted based on some other information? Because I seem to recall there was a lot of discussion, a lot of colorful discussion about where it should be, and maybe somebody can help me with that. But I'm just trying to remember how that evolved in terms of where the barriers were placed versus where they were originally proposed.
Yeah, I can speak to that just the tiniest bit. I don't work for the Department of Water Resources.
I know,
and it was
I
up to
know,
them
just-
to make those decisions.
Of course.
But my understanding is that they explored many different permutations of where the barriers could be, and they used modeling as a way to study what the effects would be based on lots of different placement. And I'm not sure what the combination of factors were that helped them decide where to place the barrier, except that I think there were 3 originally proposed, and they discovered through the modeling that they could achieve the water quality protection that was necessary with just the one barrier. To the earlier point you made about rock barriers not necessarily being the best permanent solution to this problem, I think that's important as well, and there are conversations right now that are happening in a multi-agency stakeholder landscape about potential future changes to Frank's Track specifically. And if any changes were to occur there, one of the benefits that a project would target would be salinity protection, long-term salinity protection. So right now, those conversations are in the really early stages, and we're not, the state has not committed to doing a project. They're just committed to exploring it with the local communities and getting input on different ideas of what could be done. But yeah, I think long-term salinity protection for the water projects that is not building and taking out rock barriers, that's really an important consideration.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would just, and then to your point about the local community, there was, I remember getting stuck in some rooms where those conversations were happening, and I could not have been closer to the door. I tried to get closer to the door, they wouldn't let me out. It was a challenge. I mean,
Yeah.
DWR was really pressed, I know you don't work for DWR, was pressed on all the imaginable details that a local community, a local farmer that's got pumps that are going to dry out because no one could tell them exactly what a barrier meant in terms of water levels when they've got huge investments in water that's being used for agricultural purposes. And so it was a challenge. And so to your final point, I would underscore that as well, that the importance of having a plan that includes local input so that folks feel like they're getting a fair opportunity to understand the impacts of their of a proposed barrier would look like is key. I mean, it could avoid a lot of headache for future demands on something like this. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
And if I can on that point, thank you, Bethany, for reminding me that in the context of our conveyance, storage, and operations amendment, we did include a recommendation on this topic for more forward thinking about future rock barriers.
Thank you.
Great, that's good. Thank you, Karen. Any other questions?
No, I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you very much for a very clear, concise presentation and one or two-pager.
Yeah.
This is very helpful, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Great. I think really clearly, as was highlighted, it really emphasized the importance of the long-term monitoring data and the importance of being strategic in terms of planning ahead, because we know a drought is coming. We don't know exactly when, but we need to be much more anticipatory. So I will very briefly talk about the next paper, and there's a visual abstract. If we could bring that visual abstract up on the screen. This is a paper. It's entitled Modeling Composite Effects of Marine and Freshwater Processes on Migratory Species. This was done by Whitney Friedman from National Marine Fisheries and colleagues at University of California, Santa Cruz. And actually, I chose this paper. I'd seen it, and then Jim Klern, who gave one of the talks at the State of the Estuary Conference, gave a brown bag to us previously and also highlighted this paper, and then actually highlighted it again in his talk on Monday as a really great example of using modeling to get insight into both the scientific issues and improving our understanding, as well as management opportunities. And so this paper is looking at fall-run Chinook salmon in the Central Valley. Using almost 30 years of data, they developed a population model of the life history that's shown on this visual the diagram here, of moving from eggs to smolts, moving out from the upper watershed down to the lower part of the watershed, and then into the ocean as adults, and then back into the upper watershed that I think you're all familiar with. But this model looked at that dynamic in a mathematical sense and used the long-term data to to model and predict the population changes. And what they found was just looking at simple survival rates wasn't enough. The model was improved significantly by incorporating some additional factors, and those factors are shown in red outside the circle there. So the key factors that really were most important in affecting the population dynamics overall, if you start on the left-hand side, the temperature at incubation, so the water temperature, if the temperature is too high, that will reduce survival rates overall for the eggs, and is one of the three key factors affecting the overall life history dynamics. Then the second one was freshwater flows during migration, which they acknowledge it's not just freshwater flows, but freshwater, that's what they used as sort of an index of the conditions through migration. But freshwater flows, as well as access to habitat and food web support, but survivorship through migration. And then the third key one was marine predation. As these juveniles move out from the estuary into the ocean, they're very susceptible to predation at that stage, both by seabirds and by other fish. And they showed that actually the seabird populations on the Farallones were a good predictor of overall predation and survivorship. Yeah, so certain of these factors are controllable. We can't wipe out the Muir population and reduce predation. We really can't have much of an effect on marine predation, but we can affect water temperature by releasing water in the dams in the upper watershed for incubation, and we can have some effect on flows and other conditions during migration. So I think it's a really powerful paper that highlights using that long-term data, using integrative modeling, something that we've really been promoting here at the science program, not just biological modeling, but incorporating that in with physical factors and other models to get a better insight of what's driving population dynamics and where we do have an opportunity to improve conditions for species like salmon. And the same approach is really being used with the delta smelt and understanding the delta smelt life cycle and where there's opportunities for management. So any questions on that paper?
Yeah, does the model have a name?
It does, and it's not a name that you would really like. I think it's the FC alpha model. The fall Chinook, alpha meaning the first iteration. So the FC alpha model. That I'm sure will grab your attention.
That's your next band name.
Yeah, it could be. Do we know, was this conducted on Sacramento River data?
It actually used both San Joaquin and
Okay.
Sacramento.
Okay, good.
But it used it in a combined sense. And they identify a lot of opportunities for improvement where, separating the Sacramento populations from the San Joaquin populations, not just looking at flow as an index, but getting much better data on conditions. So, it's a great improvement, but there's always opportunity for improvement as well. Okay, I will move on, and just very briefly, in your binder, in the write-up of items for this month, there's also a summary of the Delta Invasive Species Symposium that occurred in August. And really, the highlight here is that the focus was on remote sensing. And as you heard about with the aquatic weeds in Frank's tract, using remote sensing is a super valuable tool to understand invasive species, whether it's invasive vegetation. It's even being used with trying to interpret where there are impacts of nutria, a wide range of different tools. And the science program was one of the co-sponsors of this. This is the third invasive species symposium over, I think, the last 5 years. And it's really, there's so much interest and so much impact of invasives. This is a really great opportunity to highlight new technologies, new insights on how we deal with invasive species. And then the last thing to highlight is the compass. That in September we had a staff training on science communication, and you saw how great Karen did of a job in communicating. I think the compass is a really very well recognized national nonprofit that works on science communication across a range of sort of environmental issues. And so they actually provided a training at the Bay Delta Science Conference a year ago, and came back and did a training for all staff across the entire council. And I think it was very, very well received and really useful training. Then briefly, I want to mention, in terms of upcoming issues, things that to keep on your radar that are there in the write-up as well. The announcement for the 2020 Delta Science Fellows is out, and we will be accepting applications through December 20th. Actually, just this morning, there was a webinar for students and postdocs who are interested, and we want to be sure to try to spread the word as widely as possible for PhD students, master's students, and postdocs who are interested in doing more work, and not just academic research, but really applied research. They have to have a community mentor, so that we're really engaging them on management issues and giving them the opportunity to get engaged on issues throughout the Delta. And then last, in terms of upcoming symposium, there is a symposium on thresholds and restoration. And the idea of this is really that restoration projects do not always develop so predictably, and sometimes develop in unexpected ways. There may be thresholds or impacts that cause the restoration projects to develop unexpectedly, and there's a lot of interest from the ecological theory standpoint of understanding ecosystem development, as well as the applied issues of how do we manage systems so that we can encourage development towards a targeted ecosystem. So this will be an opportunity for researchers, managers, practitioners to come together and talk about a range of issues related to ecosystem development and restoration. And it's we always have good speakers. I'd say, maybe I'm biased because I'm interested in restoration, but the speakers for this are outstanding speakers. I think it'll be a really good symposium coming up in November. And then lastly, by the numbers, it's the first new year, the water year. This is in your binder. You'll see that most things are green. The two things that are not green, precipitation, were below average, but it's the first month, so that's really not very meaningful. And then the exports to the state and federal projects are reduced, and that's actually related to salinity issues. And they are reducing exports to reduce salinity intrusion for Delta smelt, and they are reducing exports rather than increasing outflow from the reservoirs because they need to hold that water back to maintain, to have water for temperature management for salmon. So if you see that, actually we were surprised at how low the exports are, but it's related to the fall salinity management issues.
Ken?
Just real quickly, on communication, I really want to compliment the council staff that were at the Estuary conference. They were very active on social media and Twitter, and I almost felt like I was there. Bonnie was one of them. And
there they are, the Twitter stars.
Yeah, it was great. Pictures of John were out there, and Andrew's "it could get worse" quote got some prominent display. But it was really, you guys did a great job, and you get a lot of exposure, and your enthusiasm and the importance of the conference really came across. So
thank you. That's much appreciated.
Thank you.
yeah, and that's like rare positive stuff on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Good. Thank you, and thank you to everyone who is doing all that. Okay,
Thanks,
we're
John.
finished.
Is there any public comment? No public comment. Okay. Well, then that takes us to Agenda Item 10, Council Consideration of Endorsement of the 5-year review of the Delta Plan Final Report.
Okay, thanks. As promised, we're here returning to you with a final draft of the 5-year review of the Delta Plan that's required by the Delta Reform Act. It's been about a year-long process, give or take. And we're proud to present what we hope to be a nearly final document for your consideration and endorsement. New today is a companion piece that we've produced in order to reach broader audiences for this report, and that is part of your packet. And it looks like this. The Delta Plan 5-year review highlights document. So I'm going to hand it over to Harriet and the team to walk you through both the final draft full report and the accomplishments and highlights report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Again, Harriet Ross. So we're very excited to be presenting the 5-year report to you today. If you recall, we were back here in August presenting the draft recommendations report. Based on the comments we received at that meeting, we've made some minor changes and refinements, and that's the report you have before you today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Schwartz and Brittany Young to talk about those specifics. Thank you.
Chair Tatayan, council members, it's a pleasure to be back with you again. So yeah, we have a relatively short presentation for you today. I just want to take you through kind of one more time what's in the report really quickly, hit on some of the things that we've updated since we last spoke. Brittany's going to go over the highlights document that we have. That's really a more communications piece, an easier, more digestible summary of this longer report. And then we have an action item that we recommend that you endorse this report and its findings. So just really quick reminding us what the objectives of the 5-year review were. This is legislatively mandated in the Delta Reform Act, and we wanted to reflect on the successes and challenges of our initial efforts across agencies to implement the Delta Plan, focusing on the council's near and future efforts to implement the plan, and identify planning topics and different areas where we might need to update the plan in the future. So as we've talked about over the last about year and a half, starting in May 2018, we came to you. There may have even been one prior to that before I even came to the council, but at least in May of 18, we came with an initial assessment and plan for the review process. We incorporated over the last 18 months or so the review and inclusion of all of these different areas, covered actions, performance measures, working with DPIC and getting their opinions, getting opinions from outside stakeholders, and we did an extensive stakeholder outreach effort that we summarized in the March 2019 meeting. Also in March, council members had a workshop where we took in your feedback and incorporated that in what we were doing in our review and some of our recommendations for moving forward. In May, we were here with a presentation of preliminary findings and recommendations, and we had an extensive workshop where we got more feedback and honed in on those recommendations and findings. And then finally, in August, we presented our draft report, and we had a short discussion then and asked for any feedback after that meeting that you wanted in the final plan. So here we are today with our report, or review report, ready for your endorsement. Oops, wrong button. It includes, as it has since August, an introduction, accomplishments that goes over some of the high-level accomplishments of the council and the science program over the last 5 years. And then a general finding that the Delta plan is in good shape and doesn't need major revisions at this time. And then our specific findings and recommendations relating to strengthening the plan implementation and 4 key planning topics and emerging issues that we've talked about before. So just to really quick go over some of the changes that we've made since you last saw the document in August. In the procedural adjustments section, we've added a new priority action, and these were all basically to be responsive of items that we heard in our last council meeting and in additional feedback that we've heard from you since that meeting. So we've added a new priority action to conduct a council workshop on administrative procedures to elicit lessons learned and experiences from interested parties relating to covered actions and our administrative procedures around those. In the adaptive management section, we've added new text relating to funding for adaptive management, particularly around monitoring and the ongoing management of those adaptive management sites. In the key planning topics and emerging issues sections, we've added new text to each subsection to more succinctly describe the issue and frame the discussion. There was still some questions at our last meeting that led us to believe that we could do better at clarifying those issues. So we've tried to add some text there and context to make sure that's clear. For environmental justice and disadvantaged communities, section specifically, we added new text and graphics to reinforce the statewide significance of that issue and the fact that water being from the Delta goes to many disadvantaged communities throughout the state, not just in the Delta. So we've added that. Some other additions include additional graphics throughout the report to illustrate key ideas and a foreword from Jessica Pearson kind of outlining what we've done here and setting some additional context. So with that, I will turn it over to Brittany. And I just want to, before I do that, I just want to say that Brittany and her team should be recognized for the Herculean effort that they were able to do with very short timeline after we finished our work to get this all together and to put it into such a beautiful format. And our consultant, Stan Tech, was really helpful in all of that and all of the 5-year review work, but particularly in this last push.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, we wouldn't have a report or a highlights document if it wasn't for the report, so kudos to planning. So I just wanted to share a little bit with you guys about the 5-year review highlights, which many of you have in front of you right now. So can you hear a little bit better? How many council meetings have I been to? There we go. All right. So coming from the March workshop that we had, something that came out of that was that we needed more communications tools for talking about what our agency is up to, why it's up to those things, and how, and understanding that we have an audience who's interested in the details, which would be in the full report. That's over 65 pages. We also have an audience who's interested in a summary of those details. So we have created a high-level overview of the full report. It's called the highlights. It's 8 pages, so significantly shorter, but it follows the same format as the report. So you have the introduction, you have the accomplishments, the findings, and the recommendations. And the intention behind this was that we wanted to summarize the council's achievements in the first 5 years of Delta Plan implementation, and also chart the activities that we'll pursue in the next 5. Voila. It's fun size, as the communications team likes to say.
Great. So I would open it up to any additional comments, last changes that you'd like to request to the document, and then we will move to the resolution that we have prepared.
Any additional comments, council members? No, any questions? Ken? Maria?
I just was, I think in May, we have done enough discussions and stuff on this, and I think it was a positive process because we had gotten to it in May, seeing what you have done in the solutions or suggestions that we had. So I think it was kind of a collaborative process, which I think we should continue doing.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think you all did a great job, especially in responding to a lot of comments that were kind of all over the place, and you put it very succinctly for me. Well, everybody else was spot on. I just want like a couple of comments on or questions on the environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. You know, if you go to figure 4-5, the state map, you know, I just want to kind of confirm that when you look at kind of that big DAC in the middle of the state, in the Central Valley, that we're also, you know, we're tying the achievement of the water supply reliability goal to that specific environmental justice, because the socioeconomic impacts of not having a reliable supply in that area are pretty profound and something I don't think gets talked about a lot. And that's kind of, you know, as we try and accomplish water supply reliability, there's some big consequences. And there's not the options and there's not the resources that we saw in Southern California, in urban Southern California, in the Central Valley. So I just want to make sure we don't lose that linkage between that co-equal goal and the disadvantaged communities in that area. And then on Delta is an evolving place. You know, that was
What page are you on, Ken?
I'm on page 4-35. So just, you know, this is just general about kind of the approach there, an issue paper and a public participation part. I mean, you know, I want to suggest that this is kind of a core issue for us, and that maybe we have a little more structured, formal process on this. You know, we've got a lot of feedback and input from that community, and that maybe we've, you know, really have a focused effort. I don't know what that is. Is it an establishment of a separate stakeholder group to advise us? You know, one of my questions, and, you know, maybe this is for Oscar, is, you know, what is the role of the Protection Council in this? Should we have and I don't know that we do this much, but should, you know, is this worth having, you know, a focused council subcommittee to work with staff on developing whatever comes out of that? I don't want to raise expectations, but, you know, maybe, you know, we need to make this a little more formal so that it all ties together, as opposed to an issue paper that comes back, and, you know, maybe give it some thought in advance of kind of launching on this effort, because my guess is it's going to get a lot of attention and participation. So that's all I had.
did you want to talk about that, Oscar?
Yeah, actually, thank you for raising that. It's something that I was the messenger in that respect, representing the Delta Protection Commission, and I actually like what staff's identified. Thank you for the very succinct, bite-sized document here, and on the very back, under the fourth item, Delta as an evolving place, I noticed there is an opportunity for additional staff work that staff's identified in developing an issue paper that summarizes the best available science and identifies policy options related to Delta as an evolving place, which is not started, which I suspect is part of the ongoing efforts. And then also, in progress is the continued engagement of the Delta Protection Advisory Committee and the Commission. So I think there is an acknowledgement that we were looking for in some form, and I think it's surfaced here very nicely. So thank you for that.
I was just waving to my hand.
Oh. Well, any other questions, comments on the, okay. I just want to say that I really appreciate your diligence and hard work. And the forward is wonderful. It's inspiring, it's concise. I have to say kudos to Jessica for, in a very short, concise, well-written manner, explaining our progress. I am heartened by the feedback that we got. I'm just really impressed with how you summarized and worked through how to present all of the comments from all of our interested parties. So thank you for all your hard work, and thank you, Brittany, for being so flexible and professional with these last-minute requests.
No problem.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to all of you for the feedback throughout the process.
Yeah, excellent work. So, council members, we have, this is an action item. Let's get to the actual language here. Adopt the proposed resolution 2019-3 endorsing the 5-year review report and its recommendations. Oh, any public comment? Do we have
So
any public?
so the resolution includes 3 parts: that the determination that the project is exempt from CEQA under, I think, 3 different exemptions that we identified that it could fit under, that the council would endorse the Delta Plan 5-year review report and its recommendations, and then direct the executive officer to incorporate any changes identified here today. I don't think we've identified anything that needs to be changed, but that would be the 3rd part of the resolution.
Okay, now for any, is there any public comment, Lita? No public comment. Okay, then let's go to the vote.
Did we get a motion in a second?
Oh,
No, I think we did, right? I
think we
okay.
I made a motion.
So I'm going to move the first 2 paragraphs that are on the resolution. I agree with Mr. Schwartz. I do not believe there were any changes made, so I think that's superfluous. So I'll make the motion, which is printed, and I think it's part of the record, first 2 paragraphs that are appearing on the screen right now.
Okay, with that motion, you were proposing to amend the resolution by deleting item number 4, so you would be moving the resolution as amended.
You know what? I'll move it any way that is easiest. How about that?
Adopt resolution 2019-3.
So there's a motion from Councilmember Weinberg to adopt, well, are you withdrawing your motion to?
My motion is hereby tabled.
Okay,
Let's
so
discuss it.
So then there's
at
a
the next
motion
meeting.
from Councilmember Weinberg to adopt the resolution as proposed by staff?
Yes.
Let me second that.
Yeah.
So we have a motion by Councilmember Weinberg, second by Councilmember Gatto, and now we can move to the vote.
Weinberg, aye.
Gatto, aye.
Marani and I.
Fiorini, aye.
Tatai and I.
Villegas, aye.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. If I might say,
That's the most controversy this item had all.
Thank you.
So, oh, yep. Oh, okay, then if I may just close this item out, is that okay? Okay, thank you so much. I really want to appreciate the work of staff in pulling this together and the support of the council members in really making this a robust and thoughtful document. This is a milestone. This is the first legislatively mandated review we've done of the Delta Plan. I think we learned some things about ourselves. We learned a lot about what we can improve, but we also learned about what's working, and it's very valuable. This is a perfect segue to tomorrow's retreat, where we will talk about what do we do about incorporating these ideas and emerging issues that we've identified. And also with the various kind of communication novelties and strategies you've seen today, how can we build on those to improve our overall communications plan going forward? So thank you very much.
And if I can get extra copies, I would love to share them with my colleagues on the Protection Commission.
Absolutely, happy to.
Did you, so Maria, did you
I
have?
just had one question on the executive's report, which I did not get to ask when we were going through, if I may.
Sure.
On the budget page, there was a presentation of the budget and then the year-to-date number and by division of science, planning, administration, executive. Is this budget presented once a year usually? Like, and when it is, that's one question. And the second question, is there a comparative analysis that you do of year-to-date versus, let's say, for the past 2 years, and gauging where you are in overall?
Yes, and invite Jessica Law to come to the table in case I mess something up. But this is a new report that we've been producing at the request of the council this year. I think this is the second or third quarterly report we've produced. So it's certainly possible to change the way we present it to you. Actually, the Department of Finance does require that we produce annual numbers that are, they track obviously year to year to year. And so even if you look in the governor's budget in January, it'll always show the previous, I believe, 2 years, the current year, and whatever the new budget numbers include. So all of that information is available. And if there's a way we can better incorporate it into the document, I'd love to hear that feedback.
I'm not asking for more information. What I'm asking is that if the gauge of, like, let's say there's planning, there's science, and then there's administrative and executive. And every year, and then when you do year-to-date numbers, first 6 months, let's say, are you mostly at the same place? Yes, that's one of my questions. It's not that I need more info.
Yeah, in this year, we're in a new fiscal year, I was going to say. And last year, we spent a significant amount of science funding through the competitive process. So we have had varied science funding levels year to year, so it's a little hard to assess that. I think our planning budget has been pretty steady, and I think the pace is probably about average of what we would expect.
Yeah, so I was thinking the variable is really the science, right? The rest are pretty much similar.
I think that's correct, and as you know, and as we'll feature at the DPIC meeting on November 4th, we're really trying to figure out how to improve overall science funding picture for the Delta, and so hopefully in the future we'll see those numbers grow.
And then the pie chart shows the totality of all the dollars that you have in your report when it says general fund budget report.
Yeah, we have 2 fund sources, so that would be general fund and environmental license plate fund. So they're shown as, I believe, 2 separate pie charts on that graphic.
So the one's back. Yeah, thank you.
Didn't need any back.
No, I never need more info. I just need to break down what I am seeing.
Do we have any general public comments? None? Okay. Well, tomorrow we'll be having our council retreat at Sierra Health Foundation's Capitol Room. Address is 1321 Garden Highway. And our next meeting will be November 21 at the Delta Conservancy Boardroom, which is at 1450 Halyard Way, Suite 6. So the Delta Conservancy will be hosting us. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.
All right.
You know where the farm bureau is? Off the Garden Highway.